is devoted to the sub-security issues, and of course we can discuss the concepts, soft, hard, or use different other terms, but what is important today is to discuss the security in comprehensive terms, because quite often it seems that security quite often is still associated quite too much with the military security, and that other elements are quite often seen as auxiliary to the military security. However, this is something about much more. These threats might not be that imminent, not that visible, but this is something that we have to discuss, and of course you can call them non-military issues. You can divide that in sectors, in military, in political, societal, economic, energy, whatever. But we will try to discuss them in the best way we can today. Therefore, we have 4 excellent speakers in the panel. And we have a German corner on my left. And first of them, on my far left, is Dr. Kai-Olof Lang, who comes from Berlin in Germany, from Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik. And he has contributed an article to this book on energy security. And I will quote Dr. Lang. He writes that a time-traveling energy analyst of the Baltic Sea area jumping from the early 1990s into today's world would hardly recognize the region. So that Dr. Lang underlines the profound changes that have been the region has seen since the beginning of the 90s. So welcome, Dr. Lang. Then Anke Schmitz-Felsman, who is quite German, but at the same time also representing the Swedish Institute of International Affairs here. And Anke has also contributed an article here to the book that we are presenting today. And in the article, she is outlining the differences between the Swedish and German views on the energy security. And they are quite diverging views at the different shores of the Baltic Sea, Sweden and Germany. And what is also important, that Anke underlines also other issues connected to energy security, so that this is not only about the supply, but this is also about the cyber and physical protection of the energy infrastructure. So we'll also be looking forward to hear from you the views. Then, going on my right, I have Dr. Viljar Väbel, who is from Tartu, Estonia, but he has many hats. And he is today representing the Foreign Policy Research Institute of Estonia, but he is also from the University of Tartu and Estonia National Defense College. And Viljar has contributed an article on Rail Baltica. But the views that he's expressing are a bit different that are usually popular here in the Baltic states. So he draws some skeptical lines and also issues to consider of the Rail Baltic project. And last but not least, on my far right, we have Dr. J. Peter Burgess, who is professor and chair at the geopolitics of risk at the École Normale Supérieure at Paris in France. And he's also adjunct professor at the Center for Advanced Security Theory at the University of Copenhagen. And he's author of several books, many articles, and he has quite extensively also published on the theoretical aspects of security and also insecurity. So that's about the panelists, and now I would like to kick off with the discussion and give the floor to Dr. Kai-Olof Lang, and to start with the energy security. Please.
Yeah, thank you, Maris. I'm happy to be here again and to share with you a couple of remarks and observations on energy security in the broader Baltic Sea region. Yes, I think, and that's why I started my text with this kind of illustration of a time traveler coming to this part of Europe today. And I think, indeed, the Baltic Sea region is one of multiple changes and transformation when it comes to the energy sector. But I think we have to bear in mind, in spite of all the uncertainty and insecurity, that looking in a more general perspective, the Baltic Sea region is in a relatively convenient situation when it comes to energy and energy security. First, we should not forget that it is surrounded by producers, by big producers. Norway, Russia. Irrespective of how these producers behave, it's an important fact which gives the Baltic Sea region an advantage compared to other parts of the world. Second, the Baltic Sea region is quite heterogeneous in various terms, in terms of the energy mix we have in the countries around the Baltic Sea. Some are quite traditional, reliant on coal, for example, Poland. Others still have a substantial contribution of nuclear. Others see their future in renewables, certainly Denmark being the front runner, Germany also doing a big attempt to carry out what is called the energy transition. But also when it comes to the role of the state in the energy systems, it is quite different. We have countries where, like in Germany, energy security, where the companies are in charge of energy security. And we have countries where the governments, for example, via state-owned, state-controlled companies, try to directly care for energy security. And of course, we have quite varying understandings of what energy security means. So this is a high level of diversity and heterogeneity, which is not bad, coexisting with each other. And I think what is also a plus for the region, almost all of the region is part of the European Union, i.e. it belongs to, at least theoretically, to one regulatory space, which we know is de facto fragmented still. But of course, they are part of the energy market and principles like energy solidarity. Of course, there are downsides, there are open flanks of Baltic Sea region energy security. There is a lack of integration, there are splits, there is a lack of interconnections between at least some countries. And practically we have different zones of vulnerability and different zones of energy security in the Baltic Sea region. What we also know, the issue of energy is highly securitized in the Baltic Sea region, and the hard core of it is, of course, differing perceptions of Russia. The positive note is, and that's the kind of positive aspect of change, the security, especially of the most vulnerable countries, like the Baltic states, has improved in the last years. I think the European Commission, the European Union, especially the European Commission, was quite instrumental. It was an important ally. Look at the situation in Lithuania. What has changed, and we don't know yet exactly what the implications are, transit increases, though the Baltic Sea region is much more relevant for the export, especially from fossil fuels from Russia to Central and Western Europe. We know the pipeline politics from Yamal, that was the first one in the region, then Nord Stream 1, now maybe Nord Stream 2, but also when it comes to oil transit. We also have diversification projects in the other direction, LNG terminals in Lithuania, in Poland, where transit through the Baltic Sea plays an important role. Now, we could certainly discuss the whole afternoon only about pipeline politics. I think we should bear in mind that's not the only relevant factor, but of course we should not neglect it. So that's why I would like to do some remarks on what bothers probably many of us. That's Nord Stream 2, a project which we all know. And I don't want to go into the details. I would just say, in my opinion, the Nord Stream 2 project is a triple test. A triple test for the European Union. First, it's a test for the European Commission. And in this respect, the Opal decision we recently had, so make it a more flexible usage of the transit pipeline which runs through Germany from Nord Stream 1 to the Czech Republic and southern Germany. Is this part of a bargain with Gazprom and part of an exit deal? But how will this deal look like? So the first responses I heard from Central Europe, from the countries which are opposed to the Nord Stream 2 project, they said if the price for not having Nord Stream 2 is a more intensive usage of the Nord Stream 1 road plus the onshore pipelines, that's no good. That's no good deal. So what will be the perception of the European Commission in countries like Poland, which traditionally have seen the Commission as an ally? Second test, it's a test for the energy union. I think Nord Stream 2 is a defining moment for what is called the energy union, or to say for what is in line with EU energy policy. So we kind of define the limits of what is possible and what basically is the so-called spirit of the energy union. In some way, it also implies a redefinition of the quite vague notion of energy solidarity. Maybe it's kind of a sort of Germany and other countries see Nord Stream 2 as a sort of flexible solidarity in the field of energy, to use a notion which has been used in other contexts. And the third test, I think it's a test for EU policy consistency. And the question, what has the higher weight? Energy policies, energy policy interests of important companies, more or less supportively backed by some member states, or foreign policy goals, i.e. support of Ukraine and others. What will be the implications if Nord Stream 2 materializes? I think it will not be a tragedy. It will not be a tragedy for the energy security, for the security of supply of Central Eastern European member states. There will be a sort of tendency towards sub-regionalization and renationalization. Just one example, or two examples, which I know from the Polish debate. One representative of the gas supply company, PGNiG, said, interconnections with Germany have no priority any longer for us, because there is a risk that kind of cheap gas, which originally comes from Russia, will choke our pipelines and make it more difficult to implement our diversification projects. In the long term, this could mean a stimulus for national diversification attempts. There is a similar debate about an interconnection between the Czech Republic and Poland, where Poles also fear that this gas could enter from the south. The last remark, what are the energy futures for the Baltic Sea region? I would not say the Baltic Sea region will be the Arab Gulf of Europe. Yeah, so a dangerous combination of energy actors, energy policy interests, and high politics, geostrategic interests, with a rising militarization of the region. I would say it's more mixed and more fuzzy. So I would say the Baltic Sea region will be a region of contradictions and ambivalences, a region where energy policy certainly continues to be security policy, with decreasing vulnerabilities probably. I think the Baltic Sea region will be a region of interconnection and of fragmentation, of cooperation and competition. And I think the Baltic Sea region will be one of innovation, of energy sectors, but also of parts where the status quo of energy will be defended. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kai Olaf. And now let's go to the input statement of Anke. how things look like from Stockholm with the German eyes.
Thank you very much. I will, first of all, connect back to the earlier panel on the changing or the security environment that has fundamentally changed, because I think, especially when we're talking about energy supply security, energy infrastructure in the Baltic Sea region, when we're talking about the ports, when we're talking about even cybersecurity, which was raised earlier, we have to put that into the context of the occupation and annexation of Crimea in 2014, and also then the invasion of the parts of eastern Ukraine, where the war is still ongoing today. And I think this fundamentally changes also how we have to look at energy security and supply and logistics, because we are in a different kind of environment where the Swedish government in 2015 has taken the decision to reintroduce the concept of total defense, where the civilian and the military parts of have to work hand in hand, and where there is a comprehensive preparation, at least that is intended in the foreseeable future, to deal with external actors' military aggression in its different guises. And that also has implications for energy supply security and how we talk about it. And I would say that Kai Olaf Lang really illustrates this very well in his chapter, this inherent conflict that we have in the Baltic Sea region between the two opposite sides of those treating the energy sector still as an open marketplace, where commercial actors are operating freely within a legal framework governed by liberal market rules. And on the other hand, those that are treating energy supply as part of national security. And I think it is safe to say that the Polish government and probably all of the Baltic states as well treat energy supply security as part of national hard security as well, and not just as a market issue. And also Vilja Webel in his chapter addresses this question of the economic efficiency which used to govern over the last 10-15 years the thinking about energy supply security, and which accompanied also the development of the European Union's internal energy market in electricity and gas, where we have had the successive development of liberalization directives. In 2003, it didn't go far enough, and now we're talking about the third energy liberalization package, which even Latvia now is implementing in the coming month. So we really need to look at energy infrastructure discussions in the Baltic Sea region and about the general issues of this complicated debate between those that insist it's a national security issue and those that insist this is really a commercial issue and it should just be governed by the market rules, against this backdrop of having to think in a more comprehensive way about national security, about societal resilience, and also where we are breaking exactly that principle of the ambition to comply with economic efficiency and just market rules. Because if we're talking about the resilience, we are talking about redundancies, we're talking effectively about economic inefficiencies that are meant to then secure the supply of energy to all parts of the society, but in the event of an external shock and even military or non-military aggression that is systematically applied against one or several countries in the region, then we would be talking about the supply of energy to the part of the military structure and not just the general economic efficiency and the benefits to the national customers and the production facilities in any of the countries of the region. So we're having sort of two different paradigms that are now all of a sudden clashing since the events of February 2014. And what is particularly striking is also how we are now having to, at the same time, again in parallel, deal with a new environment where a lot of the energy supply infrastructure is connected by electricity, by the digital systems for managing it remotely. And even that applies to Nord Stream 1, but also to most of any modern societies today in the region. So we are having to deal with several different challenges at the same time to ensure the security of supply, which are not just about getting enough sufficient volumes of gas or oil or coal into the country and the production of electricity by different means. So the robustness, I think, now plays a much greater role in the societal resilience and also in the preparation to face potential shocks externally. And I think there the point was well made earlier that the logistics have become much more important also in NATO's planning, and also for the non-NATO countries, Sweden and Finland. It is very important to consider that in the bigger picture, because previously any planning for supply disruptions was mainly focused on potential natural causes, bad weather, and technical malfunctions that always occur in any kind of technical systems. But now we also have to think about the possibility of systematic actions to disrupt one or several parts of societies or even several countries in the region. And there I would recommend also the chapter by Bengt Sundelius, where he sketches out the different types of scenarios for the societal resilience that we now have to consider. So what is very interesting from that background perspective of, on the one hand, still the focus on the development of open liberal markets that are cost efficient and also supply societies with environmentally friendly energy. On the other hand, that national security issue. And there it is extremely interesting to see how Germany, on the one hand, the official position is much more aligned with that traditional view of energy markets that has developed since the 1980s in the European Union, and where also the aims of the energy union are that of diversified supplies, but the focus is more on the market rules than on any redundancies or any other means of defending the country's resilience against military aggression or systematic disruptions. Whereas we have now the focus on security, hard security issues in the Swedish debate, especially about Nord Stream 2. But it was also an issue in the discussions about Nord Stream 1, where the national security aspects have become much more important in the political debates and are somewhat disconnected from this original discussion about the energy union's aims in the framework of the internal energy market liberalization and the single market development since the 1990s. But of course that all emerged in a different time period, and in Sweden in 2004 the so-called strategic timeout of the armed forces was taken, where also the Baltic states joined the European Union, and it seemed to be a peaceful, stable, prosperous future in the Baltic Sea region, where even discussions about infrastructure were focusing more on the environmental aspects of the physical infrastructure, the disruptions that it could create for the marine biology, and not these issues that are now discussed about whether renting harbor facilities on the island of Gotland or on the mainland in Blekinge on the east coast of Sweden, that could pose a tangible physical threat to Swedish national security. So this is quite a fundamental difference in the debate. In my chapter, I focus more narrowly just on the physical energy infrastructure, and specifically also on the construction of the power cable that connects Sweden and Lithuania now, and where, and on the other hand, the Nord Stream 2 issue, the gas infrastructure that is well known here in the region. But the consequences of the greater salience of the general security situation or insecurity situation in the region makes it very difficult for the European Union, in my mind, to reach an agreement, because these two positions are so fundamentally opposed in their logic. But we can talk more about that in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanke. I think you very well underlined how the energy security is connected to the other sectors of security, and how other sectors of security are connected to the energy security. So, furthermore, that it's so difficult to speak in some sectors of security as isolated ones. So thank you very much. And now let's change the topic a bit and then move to the transportation. And Viljar Bell from Estonia has devoted an article to the book concerning the Rail Baltic project, not Rail Baltica, as we call it here in Latvia.
Thank you. First, I think it's the Rail Baltica is more about the symbol of the Baltic cooperation and fitting to the European integration, and in that sense, it's more like example, and it fits also with other topics very well, because the same questions we have still the Russians somewhere out, and the Germans we want to get closer. And somewhere is Brussels, and we would like to have a good connections also with them. And we also would like to someone else to pay for all of that. And we still think we are the cleverest in the game, so we get the railway and we also get the money. If you said in advance that I'm kind of skeptical, that why I'm skeptical a bit is that during last years we have had so many black swans all around us, and as the last panel said, we are somehow, with the help of computers, becoming less and less able to predict the future. So I really don't know how the ancient people did it, but we even when we have the complete information about our allies, we even cannot predict the results of elections. So the same actually relies on the energy and transportation, and I started this topic to think, is it might Rail Baltica end up like a black swan or black elephant? And then I actually understood that it's a white elephant. It's you know, the white elephant. It's a nice animal gifted to you from the king. You have to feed it. You're not allowed to hunger it, and if it dies, you will also die. But the whole aim is that it will eat so much that you will go to bankruptcy. And in the same time, the king himself does not need to feed it. So basically, if we will be gifted a railway by Germans, built by Siemens, serviced by Siemens for next 50 years, by trains and everything else, and paid by us. So in the beginning, I think it looks very nice, small elephant, like the size of a dog, and it looks like it doesn't make much money for us. But if I'm a bit suspicious that what happens if the costs start to grow. And my debate about this was a little bit starting from that if it would be an economic project, then it would exist already. You know, the private capital is hungry everywhere. Chinese would like to put money even to things which are not profitable yet. So if even not Chinese are not investing in that, it must be really economically bad thing. So why do we do it? Because we think we only put like 50% of money in, the rest comes from the stupid Germans. Somehow they are stupid but rich. And we get the railway, and we also think somehow that we get the money as well, because the railway will be in our country. So the tax revenue will come to Estonian budget and Latvian budget and Lithuanian budget. And we still think that that the railway itself is something like the Egyptian pyramid, that it's like when you have it, then it's something in your active side, in your bookkeeping, not the passive, or not something what causes you cost. And if somebody asks in Estonia how it will make money, then people usually say, you know, you don't ask a pharaoh about how the pyramid will make money. It's a symbol. It's a symbol of Europeanization. It's a symbol of road to Brussels. One of Estonian members of European Parliament said yesterday, I think, that everybody who is skeptical about this railway is serving Kremlin interests. So I think this tells you how the things are. If I'm even criticizing it here, it's somehow unholy thing to do. Even if you ask the calculations. I have been trying to find people from Tartu who would like to try with that railway when it will one day be completed. So you first need to go to Tallinn, or to Pärnu, or to Riga. Basically you have two options: to ride 2.5 hours opposite direction, 3 hours opposite direction, or you go first 4 hours directly to Riga, and then you jump to this high-tech railway. And I haven't found yet not a single one in Tartu who would like to first go to Tallinn to go to railway. Because if you already decide for something, you go to airplane. Because if you are about. And this is one trouble. The another trouble is I've tried also to find businessmen who would say that would you like to transport something from Finland to Vilnius or to Warsaw by this railway. And they say, you know, if I already have it on ship, this cargo, why should I unload it to the railway, which is much more expensive? And even if you look at today, we have a railway actually. It's not empty land. Even today, the railway is only 50% booked for the cargo. And it's getting down. Also, the passengers are getting less and less there. Of course, I can understand it's not a very nice infrastructure. But so it has had very little business explanations. And but in the same time, you feel inside the society that somehow the institutional support is very strong. So we also try to look what could be the reasons behind of that. And we are not actually about corruption here. We are about, I think it's a very male thing. The women do it less. It's called path dependence. So you start to go to one direction. You're not sure is it the right direction, but as you started, it would be really stupid in a halfway to start to doubt and to go back, or maybe say, maybe another road would be the better. Let's debate alternatives, because you already spent resources. And in this year, I think in Estonia, we reached to that level that we started to say that it should not be debated anymore because we started already. And this makes me more skeptical if that is the argument that we started already. Then I would be more happy to hear more economic, social, or security argument. And the third thing, who will operate it. So it looks like we have had a lot of experiences how well Estonian government can operate the airlines, how well they can operate the ferry business, and I don't think they will do much differently with the railway. At least, let's say, I hope they will do. But I would like first to see how they do it with something smaller. So if we summarize the losses we had with the national airlines and this ferry affair, I don't think, like, let's say the other way, we should learn first and then do the next step. Let's learn from the mistakes and make the corrections. And also some businessmen have suggested that the transparency should be there, and also what should be there is that we should include more private capital to have this competence as well there. And technological thing, our German colleagues started with time machine, yeah? We are actually building a time machine. We are building a railway technology which is not, let's say, 100 years ago, 100 years old. Even Chinese are not building that kind of railways for passengers anymore. Does any of you know how fast is the record for a steam locomotive? Yeah, more than 300 kilometers they can go. So our railway will only go 200. And this 300 was already achieved more than 70 years ago. And we're still about to build something which is slower than the steam locomotive 70 years ago. And it is for me a little bit, how to say, unclear. Why do we need it for the next 50 years when it will be already like 120 years old technology? So I think I raised some questions, and what I should consider or what should be done next is I'm also a future payer for that services. I would like to see more impartial calculations from the state side, and also maybe explanations what will be different. I experienced in Portugal how the Portuguese national railway works from Lisbon to Porto. And the locals said that it would be cheaper to transport all the passengers by taxi. And they also said if the investors from Angola would like to buy it, they would like to sell it with €1. And that all made me think, maybe, is it a skepticism or just being cautious? Thank you.
Thank you, Viljar, as always, provoking and provoking different thoughts. And I think you have also some questions afterwards. So some might think you're more skeptical, some might maybe think you are more realistic. But let's see what is the assessment of the audience a bit later. So we have covered some aspects of energy, transportation, so by far not all of the security issues, and of course we will not be able to cover everything today. But last speaker that we have on the panel, Mr. Burgess, has extensively published and spoke on different issues apart from the hard or the military issues. So we also hope to see some bit wider perspective. So please, Dr. Burgess, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Let me start by congratulating you on the publication on this book, which I received last night and read as fast as I could and as much as I could before today, and I enjoyed very much many of the chapters. That being said, I have to sort of abuse your hospitality by contesting the very conceptualization of hard and soft security, which is kind of, in my eyes, an unfortunate transfer from hard power and soft power. I think that hard security, only in the hardest of situations, is hard security and soft security an interesting and useful differentiation. Only when the bombs are falling through the roof or the tank is rolling into my living room is it hard enough to differentiate it from the soft security. Hard is always soft, soft is always hard. It's always, when we're talking about foreign policy, a combination of real facts and imaginary fears, memories, suspicions, hopes, etc., etc. One way of approaching the problem that this opposition, hard and soft security, is trying to grasp is the concept of societal security. Societal security asks the question, when we are under threat, who is the we? What is the we? Where is the we? It's only seldomly the nation state. It sometimes is. I think of Crimea, for example. It sometimes is, so I'm not writing this off altogether. But in most cases, certainly in the European context, it's not the nation state. It's something else which is under threat. And moreover, that experience of being under threat varies from context to context. The generals feel one threat, the NATO headquarters feels another threat, the general population feels one threat, the Russian minorities feel another threat, etc., etc. So it's very important to ask, who is the we, who is under threat? And that's what societal security as a concept, as a kind of methodology tries to do. And in general it says, well, it's something about our common society that's under threat. It's something about our common way of life. It's something about our values that is under threat. It's not the nation state itself. It's the democratic institutions that we hold dear. It's the freedoms we hold dear. Maybe it's the economy. Maybe it's the energy systems, et cetera, et cetera. It's always important to situate it, to ask who is the we, who is under threat. And when we start to do that, we get a different kind of answer to the question of what kind of foreign policy we should be formulating and what kind of security issues are involved in that. For the Baltic reason, there are obviously two major framing social societal framings of security. One is the relationship to Russia, which is not just a military one, though it's also that. It's a relationship to the past, to the ethnographic redistribution that took place after the Second World War, to Crimea, which is in everybody's mind when we're talking about Russia, which is a very new event. It's about Russia's formal and informal attempts to influence policy in the Baltic region. It's about the Eurasian Economic Union. It's about the diverse threats to NATO. It's about cyber issues. All of these things which are not frontal military threats, but nonetheless which have a social embedding, which impact the general public, impact the perceptions of the public, and contribute to the general feeling of security and insecurity in the region. The second framing is the European Union, as has been discussed here in a variety of ways. In particular, the newly published, I'm sure no one's mentioned it, it's mentioned in at least one of the chapters of the book, the newly published global strategy for the EU's foreign and security policy, which to the organizers' benefit also uses the words hard security and soft security in the EU policy, and also takes up the idea of resilience, and which was mentioned in a variety of settings and already in this panel. What are the issues then when we talk about the societal embedding of threat and insecurity? Well, there's some minor ones or ones that aren't talked about as much. It depends again on where you're sitting. There's transport and energy, well described already. I don't need to touch on that. The environment is also a preoccupation of the European Union in particular and the Baltic governments. So pollution is actually a growing problem. There are a couple of nuclear power stations right across the Russian border, which you're probably aware of, which are getting quite old, which is an issue. A little larger is climate change. The Baltic countries are, of course, coastal regions, and if the climate predictions hold true, by 2030 we'll see a significant rise in the water, and coastal areas will be impacted also in the Baltic regions. There are a number of initiatives, and of course the Nordic region is also very proud of its spreading the gospel of its own environmental and climate change policies. But then the most important one, the most important issue when it comes to societal security is back to the we. Who is the we when we're talking about the Baltic region? Who is the we when we're talking about Estonian insecurity or Lithuanian or Latvian? And it's about identity. And identity, cultural, social, political identity in the Baltic region is, you know better than I do, complex. Starting with, of course, the very large Russian minorities in Estonia and Latvia. And it's interesting and important to note the much smaller one in Lithuania. Add to that the concentration of Baltic ethnographic populations in Russia, in northwest Russia, close to the Baltic borders. There's a very high consciousness of identity, and there are identity tensions in the Baltic region, which then mixed with, what else? The refugee crisis, are front and center in the consciousness, in the concerns of the Baltic populations. I have not looked at empirical research on this, I have to confess, but if the Baltic reaction to the refugee crisis is anything like what's been documented in the European Union at large, then it's the most important security issue for citizens. As I say, I can't say that specifically for the Baltics, but for European citizens in general, it's not Russian aggression, it's not climate change, it's not Donald Trump, it's the refugee crisis. So, and what does that mean? Of course, there's part of it is there's a differentiation within the Baltic states. Again, Lithuania lies right in what's called the Balkan corridor. So there's a certain flow of immigrants, refugees, from Eastern, Central Asia, North Africa, from the Balkans and through Germany, Poland, and Lithuania. And this causes frictions. There's some issues with the EU. EU refugee policy is a bit in disarray at the time being. There's lots of disagreement about how it's being handled. And even though the economic impact is negligible in the Baltics, it's a high agenda item for the general citizenry at large. And then there are differences between the Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. There are differences in openness. Those with the higher Russian minority, ethnic Russian minority populations are more sensitive. So the Estonians and Latvians are more sensitive to that. Lithuanians somehow more flexible about it. The Estonian president has spoken in favor of the EU policy, has supported Merkel. And the Latvian government has not been so flexible about it. So there are tensions within the Baltics, there are tensions outside the Baltics, but in short, and to summarize, the refugee crisis is what is on everyone's mind. Whether it would become some kind of military or quasi-military crisis is a question, an unlikely development. But nonetheless, this is where the hearts and minds of the Baltic citizens are today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Burgess. Very comprehensive explanation how security can be defined, and I think also very well underlined that security is also a quite contested concept. And when we also discussed how to call the book, how to divide it, we thought maybe let's use only security, but then people again would think that it's more like related to the military security. So it's very, very important indeed to consider security as a whole, and of course to understand who is the we. Is it individual, a group of society, a state, a region, and then of course to move forward. But I think we have reached the time for questions now, and I'd like to invite to raise your hands for a question. I see Mr. Barry has prepared a question, so please.
Cheers. Just a background, I've been reading about railways and been involved in railways for 40 plus years. And it's not only pictures, it's actually a lot of information that you read. The locomotive was Mallard, and it achieved 200 kilometers an hour, not 240. Anke, thank you for your point about management style and the fact that people want to hold on to things, whereas other people say liberalize, let go. It's quite important. Using subtractive economics, improved connectivity on the British railway system, which means I can get to work faster, get home faster, more frequency, added 20 billion to the GDP of Britain in 2015. Think about that. The speeds that are proposed for Rail Baltica, that passenger train can only go as fast as the freight train in front. Now I should be able to get to Warsaw in 3 hours. That's not going to happen. Why build it? It won't affect modal shift. People still get on a plane. They won't use the train. Latvian officials, in a lot of their advertising, always highlight freight on the Rail Baltic project. But freight traffic in Latvia is dropping year on year. What freight? Given the chronic inefficiencies by the operators, Latvian Railways, passengers, Vilciens, if you take, for example, there are 7 through platforms on Riga Centrala Stacija, and the new railway station is proposed to have 7 through platforms and an even bigger railway station, when you only need 2 platforms for current operation. They're going to buy more land.
Thank you, Barry, for the comment. Do you
just
have
wrap up, because the question is, can you therefore trust the management by Latvia of such a big project?
Thank you. We had already a question, rhetoric from Viljar. Can you trust Estonians, given their treatment of some other companies? So thank you. Are there any other questions in the audience? I see there one. And there, of course. So let's start with here.
On the energy issue, the idea of free market in energy is really a myth. It's never been an energy going back to a century. It's always been an oligopolistic situation for the West, and I can go into specifics if you like, and will probably continue for a good while. My question is, or what I don't understand, is why is Germany going ahead with the Nord Stream 2, given the fact that it will create even more dependency on the Russian gas? I guess that's really what I'd like to know. But as a point, there is really no free markets in the energy field. Having lived through a period where energy was cut off totally, it's a very short distance between having a real civilized society and going back to a primitive society. So it's extremely important to really resolve this issue for the Baltics.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Next question.
So, Peter, I was very taken by your point about the threat of the refugees and how we should be keeping an eye on this. I'm inclined to agree with you, and it's a bit of a blind spot. How do you, could you give us a sense of how you see this playing out, worst case scenario, in terms of how this threat would manifest itself? And I'm particularly interested in the dynamics of societal unity and far-right groups.
Thank you for the question. I saw there was one more in the back, or not anymore? Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much on the presentations. I was looking for some common strands connecting the presentations, and I suppose one of them is kind of the complexity models and the increasing complexity. And the arguments is that, is that good or bad? The liberal peace models, democratic peace models, integration models all kind of point out the fact that the constitutive elements of the complexity are actually good. Markets, they work. The more you have complexity, the more peaceful things are. You know, peace through caste type of thinking in Germany before the first Nord Stream project. But is that enough, the description of the complexity? But should we also look into the abuses of the complexity and the abuses or co-option, power political co-option of the asymmetries? And I suppose Anke came very close into describing the different means of using that in the energy field. And I suppose in the refugee field there's also much of that power political co-option. For example, in Germany, Russian policies have co-opted very well the refugee situation, opening up or further opening up the democratic vulnerabilities that exist in Germany. There's a good case in Finland where suddenly we had refugees in our northern Arctic border, and they went there by coincidence. They didn't come there for out of spontaneous activity. Something was taking place there. So what is this kind of interface between complexity and the constitutive elements of the complexity and power politics?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Is there any other question in the room? Well, yes, of course, our honorary director, Mr. Lynch, a very brief comment. And decision maker, of course.
I'm involved in Rail Baltic. You two guys got it all wrong, all wrong. I could go into details, but the train doesn't have to follow a freight train. The freight will be on the fast train in containers, and the containers will no longer be on cars because of emissions, right? There's no emissions from a train. And this has all been thought about. And there'll be also spots where the tracks go around each other. They're not dumb.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Lynch, for your brief comment. And I think now all of the speakers have a question or a point to answer, and I would like to propose to start again from my left with Dr. Lang, and I would also like not only that you respond to the questions, but also maybe some perspectives of how you see the respective fields in the Baltic Sea area developing further. So, for example, in the energy sector, are we becoming, at least the Baltic states, from peninsula to an integral part of the European Union energy system, or going other direction? So, please, Kajalov.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Germany and Nord Stream 2, Nord Stream 2. I mean, who is Germany? No, we had an intensive debate with Anke, who stands behind the project, and about this kind of different relationship between commercial interests and public political interests. I would still say it's a sort of, there is a business point, and it is a commercial project, which has, of course, political dimensions. It is not part of the job description, and it's not task of private companies in Germany, Austria, France, or wherever to take into account foreign policy implications of their businesses, nor European policy implications. Of course, it is the duty of EU member states' governments to be aware of the political fallout. And if they take a, let's say, neutral position officially, they should look for ways how to compensate for the negative implications in a community like the European Union. Does Nord Stream 2 mean more dependency on Russia for Germany? I don't know. We have a share of, in 2015, I think it was 35% of gas coming from Russia. Then it's Norway, about 34%. And we have the problem that the third big supplier, the Netherlands, with the Groningen fields, they are kind of going to be to finish in some time. So the explanation of the company is it's a sort of this kind of new connection with Russia helps us to compensate for the losses and to stabilize our security of supply. In terms, I think there is, and here we have the question of symbolic politics. I mean, Nord Stream 1, but also Nord Stream 2, despite the official position, of course, has also a symbolic dimension. I think it would be the only new flagship project of cooperation with Russia by companies, but also by companies located in the EU or in Germany. So of course it has a sort of political symbol. But I think in terms of security of supply, this will not be detrimental to Germany. I'm not sure if it will be considerably detrimental to the security of supply of Central European countries. So Slovakia, yes, you have the 400 million transit fees. Slovakia will feel it, no doubt. But other countries of the region, like the Czech Republic, are part of the project. And for them, it's a possibility to secure their transit position. And as I said, I think, what is the response of Poland? So now our response is to build our own Baltic Sea pipeline, the Baltic Pipe, to try to reinvigorate an old project to link with Denmark and Norway, maybe to upgrade the LNG terminal's capacities in Świnoujście, which is a sort of divergence. So it is not, I think Nord Stream 2 is not, would not be a very elegant project. It has a political dimension, and it has a sort of potential to fragment the EU's energy policy. The question we have to ask is, what is the scenario if Gazprom comes to the conclusion that for the time being Nord Stream 2 will not be built? Then I think there could be something like, much depends on what will happen in the south with Turk Stream, if there will be a route through the southeast to the EU. But there could also be something like Nord Stream 1.5. So building just one pipe of the Nord Stream 2 project, which would have similar effects at the end. I stop here.
Thank you very much. Very interesting term, 1.5, not 2. Anke, what are your thoughts and reflections to the comments?
Right. I'll just quickly summarize a few things in response to the different comments. And Mika Altola, good point about the complexity. I'll take that up. First of all, the market issue for Germany, I would say it is quite right that I often argue as well, what is Germany? Because Germany wants it, it's okay, or there are different interests, of course, also in Germany. And I would say for the German Ministry of Energy and Trade, it is an economic issue. And because Germany would turn, if Nord Stream 2 is built, Germany would turn into a major gas hub and actually challenge kind of the dominant position of Austria and Hungary in that field. Because we would be talking about 110 BCM of gas that is flowing straight into Germany through no other country, directly into Germany from only Russia. So that, in that perspective, we actually have to consider that Germany is importing from all of the suppliers a total of 80 BCM, of which the Russian share is just at 30-something%. So 110 BCM is really a big deal for Germany, as in economic terms, Germany would turn into a major transit country. Transit fees would be gained by Germany instead of Ukraine or Poland or Slovakia or any other country, because that's the first point of entry. And of course, also the construction of further domestic pipelines would be good for the German economy and for Eastern Germany in particular. So for Germany, I can see that for the German Ministry of Trade and Energy, it is a business issue. And for the privately owned German energy companies and other Western European companies, it is also a commercial issue. But then, of course, there's the question if for the German state as such, whether that is just a commercial issue, and whether in the context of what I drew up, exactly the context of the Russian military aggression against Ukraine, the implications for Ukraine as a transit country, the implications for the relationship between the European Union and Germany as well as a major country keeping the sanctions policy together, whether that fits together as just a commercial project. But I wanted to get back to what Mika said about the complexity, if I may, just very briefly. I think it was also mentioned earlier in the discussion about what NATO is doing right now and these new vulnerabilities that we have to take more seriously, because the privatization, the liberalization of the energy markets in gas and electricity, of course, opens up a range of possibilities for actors that are not just driven by private economic profit-seeking interests to exploit the system. And I know the Finnish Institute of International Affairs has come out with quite a harsh study that made that point of how these asymmetries between those that trust the markets and market governance and the private economic interests, that completely clashes with the logic behind a state-controlled or state actor that wants to use the comprehensive toolkit for exerting its influence over more than just one country. So there we have a big clash between those logics.
Thank you, Anke. Viljar, you sparked some comments and assessments here. What do you have to respond?
Yes, I'm going back to simpler dialogue next to Anke, who had a complex level. But can we trust the management appointed by the politicians? I think it's yes. And actually, this reminded me this good thing. What I heard before was that we all understand it all the time wrong way. This was also related to Estonian Air. We all the time understood it in the wrong way, and then it bankrupted suddenly. And then Johan Parts, the minister and the mastermind behind that right way, was so unpopular that was decided to be sent to Luxembourg and not to be seen again in Estonia, as his own party members said. So, how to say? We have less financial resources to have another policy implication study next to the parliamentarian study, but related to Rail Baltic, actually only one study has been made in Estonia, and it is already like 5 years ago. So we don't have much calculations how it would really go to the profit. But not to go too personal, I think the politicians, they just have their own success markers, because we researched the Estonian Air case about that. Why did they do so unpractical things? Why did they lose so much money? And they also promised that they won't lose again. I've been flying from Vilnius 2 weeks in a row back to Tallinn, and you know what a funny thing there is? In the same minute, 2 airplanes go to Tallinn. One is subsidized by Latvian taxpayer and another is subsidized by Estonian taxpayer. They are in the neighboring gates. And in the same time, 5 minutes before, an airplane goes to Helsinki, subsidized, I think, with Finnish taxpayer. And all the 3 airplanes had approximately 30% of passengers on board. So all they are heavily subsidized. And I was asking, do we really need a railway to Vilnius? So where would they get the passengers if we have already 3 subsidized airplanes? And why they are subsidized is because you have to show that as a politician that you care about your people. So you subsidize some services, and you, now to the positive thing, you tell about internalizing effect, that the companies cannot make the country like in complex way beneficial. So that's why the smart government has to step in and add one more subsidized airline. So I think I, in a way, answered to that question, that I really would like to see alternative model for the leadership in state-owned companies, especially when it's about very complex infrastructure, and especially when it costs a lot. So we already, maybe final comment about how it is related to the security. What is related is the cost of that stupidity. With Estonian Air, we lost approximately 150 million euros. So what is, for example, the defense budget for new equipment in Estonian Army? So you can calculate how many tanks or jet fighters you could buy for that money. It's just because we decided that we have to compete with the private sector to fly to Vilnius or to Helsinki. So this is this complex game, and I think why we actually have this topic here is that we need to use our resources in a wise way to be sustainable and not to be dependent from the subsidies from outside. And also, there's one more regional effect what was there. With this new museum what we have in Tartu, the biggest in Baltics, I hope you have visited already, the Estonian National Museum. You know, to open it we had to close, I think, 10 old museums. The Postal Museum, the Sport Museum, and many others. So the fully working museums were closed to have this European subsidized, partly subsidized museum to be opened. And I really hope that the railway will not be the same example, that to have one shiny railway, we have to close the other ones, or just to say that, you know, we don't have the maintenance money. Thank you.
Thank you, Viljar. And last but not least, Dr. Burgess.
Thank you. On the threat playing out, just to be clear, maybe just so we understand each other, a threat is not a fact. A threat is not a thing. It's a threat is an imagined danger, a perceived danger. So refugees are not factually threatening anything except imagined things. And the imagined thing that they're threatening is the we I was talking about at the outset. Our cultural identity, our religious identity, our social identity. And that's not to be taken lightly. I mean, that's to be taken very, very seriously. Wars have been started for just that, and they will be started again. Unfortunately, though, the sort of right-wing intolerant populism that's arisen now all around Europe, from the Netherlands to Denmark to Norway, Sweden, France now, after the elections yesterday, the primary elections yesterday, looks like Marine Le Pen has gotten a boost in the polls for the presidentials. And of course, in the US, there's a rise in this kind of populism. And the worst case scenario that you're asking me to speculate on is actually what's happening. And that is the decline of liberal democracy. The New York Times reported this morning that Angela Merkel is the last remnant of liberal democracy in the world. Congratulations, or condolences. I don't know which it is. But so we're turning the page to an era. Maybe it's not the end of the end of history. It will come back. But we're turning the page to a kind of illiberal democracy or authoritarian democracy, and that's the worst case scenario. And it's happening already. And it has nothing to do with the economic burden of refugees or where do we lodge them, or where do we go to school, or can't they learn the language, or any of these things. It's about how we feel in our culture and our society is threatened by their presence among us, which again is not to be taken lightly. Just to comment on the complexity, I think that's also a very, very important element to take on board in this discussion, and it's not really been taken too much today. Complexity, of course, is a double-edged sword in this kind of situation. On the one hand, it implies that everything is linked together, and when there's an instability in one end of the system, then it plays out all over the system. On the other hand, and positively, complexity is the key to resilience, because if one subset of a social or political or economic system fails, then the rest of the system tends to be able to stabilize and make sure that the long-term longevity of the system is in good hands. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with the term complexity, I think we can stop, and then of course we can underline that security is complex and the region is complex, and it's always in a course of development. But before we finish the event, there's also closing remarks that I will invite Dr. Sproats to introduce the closing remarks. But before that, please thank the speakers of the panel and welcome the closing remarks that will be covered today.
First of all, thanks, Maris. It's been quite a long day, so I'll try to be as short as possible. I think what Mr. Burgess was saying, that we are turning the page. It seems we are turning the pages recently, and it's like permanent process. And as I sometimes repeat, that we thought that we lived in post-historical nirvana, that this nirvana has ended, basically. So history is back, geopolitics is back, revenge of great power ambitions in many ways in 21st century. So we face a number of dilemmas and challenges here in the region. Complexity, as was mentioned here. So I would add complexity and diversity of insecurities, but at the same time stabilizers. So I think one region which encompasses a number of different sources of both the vulnerabilities and also how we stabilize the region and make it more secure. The region has become, to use quite a popular, fashionable term, in a sense, hybrid in itself. So some kind of hybridness of the region. On the one hand, we see deterrence. On the other hand, we see dialogue. On the one hand, we see that the region is stable, but of course it is influenced by insecurity from outside. But insecurity is not generated within the region. Let's hope that we will stick to this because of those stabilizers. Last but not least, of course, resilience has been mentioned on many occasions. I would add to this, it's a sort of mental resilience. We have to be ready for times of uncertainties, for times of complexities, that those pages are turning all the time. And of course, in this case, both political will and responsibility by the politicians is important. But you can also add to this that think tank community is very important in communicating and verbalizing, let us say, those discussions and important things in the region. So with this, I am happy to conclude. These are my own thoughts, but I certainly can envisage that you have your own thoughts, what you take out of this discussion. I hope it's been a very fruitful and valuable discussion and timely discussion. I would like to thank many people, first of all, for audience to come to join, to the authors and speakers to participate and enrich both the publication, also this discussion. Of course, always I'm very happy to thank our partners, be it SAIMA, be it Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, be it NATO, be it Nord in this case as well. I would like to use the opportunity to thank my own team, or our team, Maris, Ilvija, Cynthia, Katrina, Artur, so there has been a quite wide range of teams. This is one of the final events of this year. We will not trouble you so intensively anymore as we have been doing it in the last few weeks as well as publication and events. So there's a bit of time of reflection, or season of reflection, also Christmas, so it's connected in many ways. But with this, I am very happy to give the floor to Werner Rechmann, who has been a very strong partner of ours, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, Regina, of course, Werner, and other people at Friedrich Ebert Stiftung has been very instrumental for us to succeed, not just for this year, but for the previous years as well, and this investment has been made. And Werner, of course, it's always a pleasure to have you on the board. Unfortunately, some kind of era is even finishing. Some kind of the times of yours and our cooperation, unfortunately, have been finishing. But at the same time, we are absolutely looking forward for future cooperation and seeing you still in Riga here, dropping by and giving you a wise thought, which we are not always agreeing with. But this is actually the pleasure of having you on the board. Werner, please, the floor is yours. And please give me the round of applause as well.
Andres, first of all, I would like to say thank you to you as a person, personal, and to the whole team, because for the last 4 years, I spent in Riga and responsible for the Baltic states. It was such a pleasure, and also I learned quite a lot out of the debates with you, also with your team, and in different here workshops and also book presentations. So that, first of all, I would like to thank you, and like it or not, I will come back. Closing remarks. For me, there are really closing remarks, because it's my last remarks when I'm in Latvia, because by the end of this year, I will retire after 37 years within the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, and I'm an old father, or the other way around. I have a young kid, and the girl is 13 years old, and she said, "Papa, come home." We are living, the family is living in Berlin. I'm flying each and every weekend. So I think it's time now, because when I'm continuing for another 2 years, then she will be 16. "Father, I don't need you anymore, Papa. I have now my first boyfriend," or even the second. You never know in this generation. So I'm leaving, and it's not only a saying. One eye is really crying, and the other eye is happy. Because after 37 years, it's enough also, and other people should take over. And but I'm coming back, and I mentioned already one date I have in May already, because then I have another appointment with my dentist in Riga. So I'm coming back, and then maybe combine it with other things, of course. And it's really around the corner, Berlin, Riga, that is 1.5 hour flight. I would also thank very much all the authors of this book and all the panelists for this very lively debate. And I will not comment on that, because that would be among such an amount of experts to comment now on special issues. No, that is not what I'm going to do, and I also have not the capacity all of you have. But I started my career, job career, 1979 in Brussels in the European Commission. Since then, and 79 was also a special year because the first direct elections for the European Parliament. Since then, I have been before also, but since then I'm so persuaded that the only chance for Europe, for all member states, is the European Union. Beside all the problems we have among 28 members, it is very difficult, and I was also then heading our office in Brussels from 1979 until 2003, very fantastic time. The euro was introduced, the Eastern enlargement with the 3 Baltic states, and then also the NATO with the 3 Baltic states. The Balkan or Yugoslavian war, dramatic. Nobody was expecting that on European soil, after the disaster, what the Germans did, that such a brutal war will come up again. But the whole debate in terms of security, soft security, hard security, it is necessary that we are defending ourselves and then also the Baltic states in terms of any kind of aggression. But I think the best security for Europe would be to have a social Europe, because we have the problem that is in France the case, and you mentioned it, that is in Germany the case. We have this populist right wing and also in Germany neo-Nazis who are trying now what means to be a German. And I think the problem is that also within the EU we have a tremendous kind of wealth, 70 years of peace, which is fantastic, has never happened before in Germany. Each and every 30 years there was a war, especially with France or with others, also before with Sweden. And now we have such a peace period which is not given also for the next future. We have to fight for it, and that means what I think also in terms of security would be the major future project. We have to stop the youth unemployment. Because a young man or woman who has no job, why should they be in favor of the European Union? Why should they be in favor of any state, any government, when the system is not offering anything? And it's so easy for in Germany, the neo-Nazis and also the Le Pen in France to catch these people who are the losers within the European Union, beside of the tremendous wealth we have. So the income distribution, we have to work on that, so that the people within the European Union, with all the problems, reforms are needed, no question. That is a debate for another conference. But if we don't get them back to think, yes, I have also an advantage in which way soever out of this huge building European Union. We will lose them, and then we will have the right wings. And look, nobody was expecting that Trump is the elected president. My hope is, out of the disaster, beside of the disaster, my hope is that the European Union, also in defense, in foreign policy, and also in terms of the distribution of income and wealth, are more closely working together, because it's a major economic power in the world with 500 million inhabitants, and that is a chance for Europe. And we will not solve this problem only by increasing the defense expenditures. If we don't do the precondition that we get the people who are lost now in all countries, for example in Spain, a youth unemployment of 40%. What is the future for these young people? If we are not offering, as a European Union, as a state, as a community, anything to these people, then we can spend for defense whatever we like. It will not solve our European Union problem, because what you mentioned, the identity, and with a state, doesn't matter where you are coming from, and also, and that means not German identity, German blood or whatever, but the identity that you think the liberal and democratic Europe with the different states, that is a system which is much better than the Russian system or other system we can see all over the world. And I think there we have to fight, because the danger would otherwise be, let's say, Le Pen is becoming president in France, and then stepping out of the EU. That's it. Then then the EU is gone. Brexit is already a disaster, in my opinion, not only in economic terms, but also in the social system as part of the European Union. So that is my hope, and maybe what Putin did, he forced the revival of NATO. So let's Trump do the same to revive the European Union. That are my closing remarks in terms of this topic, because I'm so convinced only Europe combined has a chance for the next 70 years. My daughter will be then 83, and I hope she will have no war on European soil in her time. Because I was happy until now. I don't know what war means. My parents realized it, but not myself. And we have to defend it. We have to defend our democratic system, the liberal system, and independent powers, and we have to fight for that. It's not given. You have to learn it from for each and every generation again. So I will be here back in Riga. I enjoyed the 4 years, and therefore the final closing remarks, maybe next time I will open anything, but not closing it anymore. And thanks to all of you, and it was a pleasure to work with all of you, and thanks again the panelists and the authors for another fantastic book, and Andres and your whole team, thanks again, and also my team, Regina, Corinna, Christ. Without them, I wouldn't be here. I would have been one and lonely, and maybe not knowing one of you. So they worked in a fantastic way for the last 4 years, and they will continue. Thanks very much, and look, it's not out of my private pocket, but even that I would have spent. Enjoy the drinks and the informal debate, and also some food, and thanks again. It's really a pleasure.